March 6, 1836, the Battle of the Alamo ends in blood and fire. Imagine the final moments of the Alamo, smoke choking the air, muskets cracking in desperation, men screaming, falling, Texan rebels overwhelmed by General Santa Anna's army. Now picture this. Amidst the bodies and blood, a tall, weathered man in a coonskin cap does not die fighting, but instead surrenders, hands raised, only to be executed moments later by order of Santa Anna himself. This man is Davy Crockett, America's frontier legend, a hunter, a congressman, a folk hero. But what if everything we've been told about his death is a lie? In this video, we'll examine the shocking evidence, explore the Mexican military records, and hear from historians who've spent decades investigating the truth. For nearly 2 centuries, the official version of events has painted Crockett as a martyr who died with a rifle in his hand. But a mysterious document, the Pena diary, suggests something far more disturbing, that Crockett survived the battle and was executed by the Mexican army. And that revelation, it rewrites Alamo history. It cracks open a carefully built American myth. Among the defenders, there were 6 who survived. They were presented to Santa Anna, and at his order were executed. From the diary of Lieutenant Jose Enrique de la Pena. If true, this wasn't just a battlefield death. This was an ordered execution. And the man who would become an American icon may have spent his final seconds pleading, not fighting. For decades, schools, movies, and monuments have told the same heroic story. But history, real history, is never so neat. And some stories were never meant to be told. So why would this version be buried? Why would the U.S. prefer a tale of glory over a harsh truth? And what else have we lost in the rewriting of history? Was Davy Crockett really executed? This isn't just about one man. It's about what happens when legends become shields, and the truth gets buried beneath them. Before we continue, like, share, and subscribe to help our community grow. Let's dive in. Before he was a myth, Davy Crockett was just a boy born into hardship. Born in 1786 in the backwoods of Tennessee, David Crockett grew up with dirt under his nails and the wilderness as his teacher. He wasn't educated in the formal sense. His classroom was the forest, and his lesson plan was survival. His family struggled through debt, disease, and displacement, like many on the American frontier. But by his early 20s, Crockett was already gaining a reputation, not just as a skilled hunter and scout, but as a man of grit, humor, and hard-earned wisdom. He served in the Tennessee militia under Andrew Jackson during the Creek War. He married, raised a family, and against all odds, entered politics. In Washington, Crockett became something rare, a representative of the rugged working man who wasn't afraid to speak plainly. He opposed President Jackson on major issues, especially the Indian Removal Act, which led to the infamous Trail of Tears. Quote, "I would rather be beaten and be a man than to be elected and be a little puppy." His defiance cost him his political career, but it cemented his identity as a man of principle, a voice for the common frontier American. By 1835, fed up with politics, he made a bold declaration, quote, "You may all go to hell, and I will go to Texas." Crockett joined a small group of volunteers heading west. His goal, a fresh start in the newly rebellious Mexican state of Texas, soon to become the Republic of Texas. What Crockett didn't know was that this journey would lead him to the Alamo and into immortality. Arriving in San Antonio in February of 1836, Crockett joined the defenders of the Alamo, a dilapidated Spanish mission fortified by a ragtag force of Texans resisting Mexican control. He was 49 years old, by all accounts calm, confident, and well aware that he might never leave alive. He played his fiddle to lighten the mood. He spoke of destiny and duty. He was no fool. He knew the odds. One account wrote, "Though he wasn't a commanding officer, Crockett's presence was magnetic. Men looked to him for courage. He led volunteers from Tennessee, and helped reinforce morale inside the crumbling mission. But then came March 6th, the final assault, the day Davy Crockett was supposed to die. According to the traditional story, Crockett fell in the thick of battle, surrounded, out of ammunition, swinging his rifle like a club until he was finally cut down. It's a noble ending, cinematic, patriotic. And for nearly 150 years, that version of events wasn't just accepted, it was celebrated, taught in schools, etched into plaques, made into movies and reenactments. But then a diary surfaced, written by a Mexican officer, and everything we thought we knew began to unravel. For over a century, the story of Davy Crockett's death at the Alamo has followed a clear and unquestioned script. He died as a warrior in the heat of battle, standing tall with a musket in his hand, surrounded by the bodies of fallen comrades. It's the version passed down through generations, engraved in the minds of Americans, a tale of ultimate sacrifice and patriotic glory. This version of events wasn't just patriotic storytelling, it became an essential pillar of the American frontier myth, an embodiment of bravery, independence, and self-sacrifice. So where did this official story come from? Much of it traces back to early Texan accounts written after the Revolution, often based on secondhand stories, hearsay, or even intentional myth-making. Writers and Texas Revolution veterans like John Henry Brown and William P. Zuber helped enshrine Crockett's heroic death. Zuber, for example, published an account decades after the battle that described Crockett dying amid a pile of enemy soldiers he had personally slain. Quote, "His body lay surrounded by no less than 16 Mexican soldiers, all dead by his hand." This was not history. It was hagiography, the crafting of a saintly figure for national inspiration. The idea of Crockett dying with violent defiance served a symbolic purpose. It made him a legend, not a man. It made the Alamo not a tragedy, but a sacred act of resistance. And most importantly, it avoided an uncomfortable truth that Crockett may have surrendered. In the absence of confirmed eyewitnesses from the Texan side, since almost all the defenders died, the U.S. historical narrative had gaps that were filled by assumption, emotion, and sometimes national pride. Even Susanna Dickinson, one of the few Texan survivors of the Alamo, did not personally witness Crockett's death. Her testimony mentioned seeing bodies, but not how or when Crockett fell. So why did Americans embrace this story so fervently? Because it made sense, because it was comforting, and because it was useful. In the wake of Texas independence and U.S. expansionism, Crockett's tale was used to teach values: courage, sacrifice, patriotism. No one asked too many questions, but history doesn't stand still. In 1955, a dusty leather-bound manuscript surfaced in Mexico, long buried in the National Archives, a diary written by a man who had been inside the Alamo during its final hours. Its contents were handwritten, faded, but the name at the bottom was unmistakable: José Enrique de la Pena, lieutenant in the Mexican Army under General Santa Anna. What lay inside this diary would rattle historians and shake the foundation of Alamo legend. In his diary, Pena writes that several men, including one with features that matched the American known as Crockett, were captured alive. Pena writes, "Among the defenders of the Alamo, there were 6 prisoners taken alive. They were brought before Santa Anna, and by his order, they were executed." And later adds, one of these men was well known, perhaps the famous American Davy Crockett. According to Pena's diary, Crockett didn't fall in glorious combat, not killed in battle, not struck down in glory, but captured, and then executed without mercy. He surrendered, perhaps believing he would be treated with honor, but instead, he was executed alongside the others. This single account sent shockwaves through the historical community. Skeptics were quick to question the diary's authenticity. Was it genuine? Was it political propaganda? Or a forgery? But in the decades since its discovery, multiple forensic studies have validated the ink, handwriting, and paper as consistent with the 1830s, content consistent with Mexican military records. It's now generally accepted by serious scholars as authentic, but authenticity doesn't automatically mean accuracy. Could Pena have misidentified Crockett or been influenced by anti-Santa Anna sentiment after Mexico's defeat? Pena wasn't the only Mexican to mention surviving prisoners. Other accounts, such as that of Colonel José Juan Sánchez Navarro, also refer to captives being executed after the battle. Sánchez Navarro wrote, "After the battle, some prisoners were taken, but on orders from His Excellency, they were put to death immediately." No names are mentioned, but the pattern matches Pena's account: a capture, a refusal to spare them, a direct order, an execution. The moment this diary became public, the reaction was explosive. Historians were divided, politicians were suspicious, and many Texans were furious. Why? Because if the Pena diary was accurate, it meant the American narrative had been wrong. It meant Davy Crockett, symbol of frontier bravery, had not died a glorious death, but a humiliating one. Lieutenant de la Pena's account was specific. He described how the Mexican army overran the compound, how amid the chaos, 6 defenders were captured, including a man identified as Crockett, and how Santa Anna, seeking total domination, ordered their immediate execution. Quote, "They died without complaint. Their courage did not fail them, even at the end." Even in de la Pena's version, Crockett was brave, just not in the way we were taught. The Pena diary doesn't diminish Crockett. It humanizes him. He fought until the end. Then, when there was no way out, he surrendered. That's not cowardice. That's reality. But the American public wasn't ready for reality. Not this one. For many, the diary wasn't just controversial. It was blasphemy. Texans, in particular, had built entire identities around the myth of the Alamo. For them, Crockett was more than a man. He was a symbol, the embodiment of independence. But historians were torn. Some embraced the diary as a rare first-hand Mexican perspective, offering a fuller, grimmer picture of the Alamo. Others called it a forgery, a fabrication designed to discredit a national hero. No credible evidence of forgery. Ink and paper matched the 1830s. Content consistent with Mexican military records. The diary was not fake, but that didn't mean everyone accepted it. Even if de la Pena believed it happened that way, memory is fallible. He may have misunderstood, misidentified. Was it really Crockett or someone who looked like him? Some historians said. And therein lies the mystery. There is no known physical description of Crockett from that day. No photographs, no confirmed remains, just stories, conflicting accounts, and one diary that dares to say the hero didn't die the way we wanted him to. The Pena diary doesn't rob Davy Crockett of his legacy. If anything, it forces us to see him not as a myth, but as a man who fought bravely, who surrendered with dignity, and who may have died not in triumph, but in tragedy. But de la Pena was not the only witness. Other voices, Mexican and Texan alike, would soon surface, adding more complexity to the mystery. If the Pena diary stood alone, perhaps it could be dismissed, an anomaly, a soldier's mistake, a misremembered detail. But it doesn't stand alone. In the decades that followed the fall of the Alamo, other voices emerged, some whispering, some shouting, each carrying their own version of what happened that morning in 1836. Some corroborate Pena's chilling claim. Others fiercely contradict it. Some of the accounts on Davy Crockett's death includes Francisco Antonio Ruiz's account, the alcalde, mayor, of San Antonio in 1836. Ruiz was ordered by Santa Anna to identify the bodies of the defenders after the battle. In an 1877 account, over 40 years later, Ruiz stated that Crockett's body was found surrounded by no fewer than 16 Mexican corpses. This matched the popular American version, Crockett dying in combat, heroic to the end. But Ruiz's account was given 4 decades after the fact, and it wasn't written down by him. It was passed through other writers and published with editorial flair. Ruiz's account is useful, but it reads more like validation of the legend than a clinical observation. José Enrique de la Pena, revisited briefly for comparison. Pena was present during the assault. His diary says Crockett was taken alive, presented to Santa Anna, and executed with 5 others. This is not an interpretation. It's a direct statement from a Mexican officer who participated in the attack, Ramon Martinez Caro, Santa Anna's personal secretary. Martinez Caro wrote years later that Santa Anna had executed several survivors despite protest from his officers. He didn't name Crockett specifically, but confirmed the act of post-battle executions. It's a damning reinforcement of Pena's story. Those officers begged for mercy to be shown, but the general was firm. He wrote, Susanna Dickinson, one of the few Texan survivors, as one of the most cited Anglo survivors, Susanna Dickinson told a tragic tale, but she never claimed to see Crockett's death directly. In her earliest interviews, she described seeing Crockett's body mutilated near the chapel, dead, not captured. But her statements evolved over time, influenced by writers, journalists, and public expectations. She was interviewed multiple times, each account changing slightly. Memory, especially after trauma, isn't always reliable. In the 1950s and 60s, researchers tracked down descendants of Mexican soldiers. Some passed down stories of 6 men being spared at first, then executed on Santa Anna's order. These oral histories aligned strikingly with Pena's written one, but without physical evidence, critics still questioned their validity. And then there's the unsettling silence, the lack of a grave, a body, or final confirmation. No official Mexican or Texan record ever accounted for Crockett's remains. No autopsy, no battlefield identification. He vanished, absorbed by myth and memory. So what do we do with these conflicting testimonies? On one side, we have stories of resistance, bodies piled around Crockett, and glorious final stands. On the other, cold, brutal military efficiency, a general silencing heroes before they could become symbols. Both are possible, but only one feels good. Only one became legend. It tells us that history at its core is always more complex than we were taught, and that truth, uncomfortable as it may be, might just be more powerful than myth. We may never know for certain, but the testimonies refuse to be buried. To this day, many still ask, was Davy Crockett executed? Or did he die fighting with a rifle in his hands?